everyone, for this Something Bad Thursday, I am going to be discussing young adult adaptations, in particular movie adaptations, from books, whether they be good or bad. I've seemed to notice that a lot of the young adult novels are starting to gain grounds when it comes to movie adaptations. I think that it seems like since they have risen in popularity and have been thoroughly recognized, in particular with the teen community, I think it only makes sense that somehow we would get this need and desire for a lot of teens to have these kinds of novels adapted into movies. Now, unfortunately, I think the more vast majority of these kinds of films, these sort of young adult teen novels, in particular, I think they're generated more towards women. However, there are some young adult novels that are more segmented towards males, and I'll sort of get to a list of films that sort of reflect these two market segments that are being targeted for these films. But basically, and I'm speaking the vast majority of, I think, young adult adaptations are not as of good quality, or don't hold a high standard, or don't compare to the book that it was ultimately trying to adapt. It seems like either they fade into obscurity and nobody ever talks about them anymore, or they get very popular because the book that it was based upon was fairly popular and resulted in a lot of people deciding that the movies were sort of a faithful adaptation. Even though the novels probably aren't as strong themselves. So, again, and I'm going to point out these sort of exceptions to this young adult adaptation segment, so that I'm trying to make clear here that not all adult adapted movies are bad. Not at all. You've had the Harry Potter films, which were okay. I think the acting obviously did get better over time, but overall they seemed to be faithful to the source material, although some of the books probably weren't, or some of the movies weren't kept consistent compared to the book. But overall, it seems like everybody seems to have a positive picture when it comes to the Harry Potter films. And I think this really depends on whether or not, too, you like the book. So, again, I think that's sort of a young adult book that I think a lot of people have recognized as to be good. As well as, you could say, The Hunger Games, too, although I would say that The Hunger Games is fairly violent and graphic, I think, in particular for younger children. I would say as a young adult series of books, it does have a good story and plot and characters to go with it. So overall, it's good for the young adult audience that it's trying to ultimately reach by bringing in all these different messages and themes, even though I think sometimes they can be a little bit too graphic. And again, they did this in the movie too by trying to make it not as graphic as maybe the books, so that more teens could ultimately go see the movies. So, what do we have now that is the majority of these young adult adaptations? Which ones are the ones that we don't even really remember, or ones that were considered as complete and utter nonsense when it comes to quality? Well, the Twilight series, I think, is a big a big part of this, because I think it was the series that really started this young adult movie adaptation craze that we are on now, I think. And it does seem to be the most popular, I think. However, I think there were some other ones that were also, I guess, significant in regards to the lack of quality that they had. In particular, afterwards, The Host, which was again written by the same author that wrote Twilight. You had The Mortal Instruments, and even previously, within like the early 2000s, we did sort of see this kind of rise in putting in more young adult adaptations in. So it's not necessarily that Twilight started it, but I think Twilight started this sort of trend of moving towards getting teenagers invested in various book adaptations. However, Aragon, I would say, is one of those that did not really go well, I guess, with its source material, and made a lot of people who read the books rather angry. And the interesting thing about this one is that this one appeals more to men, because we have, again, a male lead character, and we have these sort of more well-developed, constructed male characters, at least in the movie, even though I will admit the movie is really poor. The large focus is on trying to, I think, generate that male audience. And we've also seen, too, I think the Vampire Academy was something that was based upon some series of books, and that faded into obscurity. And we also had things like The Princess Diaries, too. Again, these were books that really were not consistent to the movie's adaptation, because the movie completely deters and kind of I almost want to say it dumbs down the actual writings of the book, because the book is a lot more in depth and has a lot more interesting characters, I'd say, than the movies do. So what's this problem that we're seeing with young adult adaptations? And why do I think a lot of them don't hold a candle? Well, I think it's because either they don't remain true to their source material, which is, I think, the majority of the case, or they're really not of good quality to begin with, hence like Stephenie Meyer's and so on and so forth, that they don't really produce something that is ultimately worthwhile and worth exploring. So that's kind of, I think, the issue is that the movie directors and people who ultimately want to adapt a young adult novel need to pick a young adult novel that is good in quality, so that not only will your movie have good quality, but it'll also appeal to the demographic that you're trying to reach. And I think what's ended up happening is that either they pick a book that is fairly popular. The Aragon series was very popular in the early 2000s. And I think it was maybe more mid-2000s. I can't exactly say when it came out, but again, it was more when I was in high school. And basically, that series of books was a good book series, but the movie ultimately ended up butchering the source material. So you either got it on two ends, okay? You have the movie producers, movie execs making movies that revolve around being that revolve around young adults or appeal to young adults, they're either going after a story that is of low quality, like Twilight, like The Host, probably Vampire Academy 2. They're going after a book that does not hold a candle to other books that could be adapted and that are generated to being for young adults. So you have those execs, those people who are trying to make films. And then you have the other movie execs, people who want to make films that are picking a good source material, but totally butchering the story and not remaining true to the source material. And it's not to say that they're not remaining true to maybe what's going on in the story, but there's a lot of things that don't hold a candle to what the book was really addressing, and you'll see this with films like Aragon. Again, you'll see this too with like the Princess Diaries. It's pretty much the same. It's the same pattern. It's like you have these two opposite ends, and I'm really wondering if there is a reason for this. I think it's understandable why the movie execs would go after ones that are of low quality, because sometimes some stuff that is of low quality is still popular, and they know that it will be good. I don't get why there are some who go for good quality books and then decide, hey, we don't need to really remain true to this story, or really provide a good adaptation. No, we don't need to do that. And I really don't understand it. I think a lot of these young adult movie adaptations fall into these two categories because there is a lacking consistency. There's a lack of effort being put onto those who are making the movies, because it doesn't seem like that they really care about their final product. They just want to make whatever will sell and whatever get people, and whatever would get people in the seats, rather than making a true adaptation. But it's almost hard to say what could be done to ultimately reverse this kind of thinking that these movie execs and producers and directors have when it comes to choosing books that are more focused in on young adults. I really don't know what it is, but it does seem like that there is a lot of either butchering of the source material or just choosing a really bad book. I think that's a bad source material, and I think that's really the problem with young adult adaptations. And I think also too, there is, I think, a really huge part of our culture that doesn't take young adults seriously, in particular teenagers seriously, and I think that's really what's probably why some of these young adult adaptations have gotten backlash. And I also think it's another reason why they don't hold a candle, and they don't end up really being as popular, and nobody ends up remembering them. And I think that's really a huge problem, is a lot of the time they choose a low quality standard of book, or they will choose something that's very popular, but then nobody will remember years and years later, or something that will make you tons and tons of money now, but maybe not in the future. So it's that kind of thinking that these people have, that I think really puts a detriment onto these kinds of adaptations that we could potentially see. I really, it's really hard for me to really say that they are as horrible or as degrading as some other bad things that I've looked into. But the interesting thing about this is that usually they're based upon books. Usually they come from this source, and I think that since they think that their demographic is naive, they think that they can ultimately sell them the movie, and I think that's the big problem. That both sides have is they think that they could sell the movie to the younger audience, the young adult audience. So, and it doesn't seem to really be working, especially when a lot of these books that get adapted, they just fade away. Nobody remembers, and really nobody ends up caring. And it's not like a huge outrage is displayed towards them, I think. I think it's more of nobody really remembers them and nobody really cares about them. And I think the reason for that is just that they were low quality to begin with. Or that the movies themselves were not being true to the source material and not providing a good adaptation. So, what can you do? These are kind of my reasonings as to why I think ultimately the majority, again, there are some exceptions to the rule, again, but I think a lot of these young adult films go into the sort of Twilight syndrome, I like to call it. They don't provide a lot of quality or substance, and they don't really end up being remembered. And maybe if they do make a lot of money, they make a lot of money initially, and then everybody forgets about them and doesn't really consider them to be classics or high ranked in regards to filmmaking. Like, they're not given like consecutive amounts of significant awards or given a lot of praise. They're just kind of there, I think, a lot of them. Not all of them, but a majority of them. And I think they fall under this Twilight syndrome, this trap of not providing a good quality story. And as a result, you will have a genre sort of going in a very unnoticed direction, and I think that's really what young adult adaptations are doing. But again, there will always be exceptions. Like I said, Harry Potter or Hunger Games. Those adaptations are fine by me. But these other ones that haven't really got fully recognized, or were fully recognized to begin with, but were just of low quality as novels, will probably continue to be made, because Lord knows, there's always a demand when it comes to teenagers. So it's just one of those things that I think won't go away, but I don't think it's going to hold a significant presence, I think, within the movie going community. I also don't think that that movies are also the problem. I think there's a lot of TV shows that have tried to do this thing too of adapting various stories and trying to put them out there, and sometimes I don't think that they are of the best quality or that interesting or compelling. So again, I think it's I just think that these movies come at a low standard because of the fact that people making the movies know that they don't need to, that they feel like that they don't need to try because they think that teenagers will just go see whatever movie adaptation is based on whatever book they read. So, yeah, I think that's just really how these young adult adaptations work. They are designed to make money, but not to hold any substance. So, yeah, I think, though, that's really ultimately all I can say about them. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I think really that's really the problem is again these two things that I talked about, where you have the bad book and the bad movie, and you have the good book and then the bad movie. So, yeah, I think, though, that's ultimately all I can say again. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, again, I'm more than happy to answer them. But I hope you all have a great day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you on the next video tomorrow. Bye-bye.